So as I said, I'm going to have a chat with Frank and then we'll get some questions from the audience. But can we go to the very beginning and can we talk about yourself? So we know, as you said, you were brought up in South Armagh, you moved to London. Are you from a legal family, and what was it that attracted you to practicing law?
Yeah, I'm very happy to talk about myself. Obviously, we should censor the Palestinian people who are facing a genocide, and that's what we're here to do. But to give you some context for why I'm representing Hamas and to give you all some insight into who I am. Yeah, it's right that I was born in Bayeux, but moved back to London when I was 1, where I lived until I was 5, and then I moved back to South Armagh, where my father is from. My mother is French, and so I had that sort of continental influence in my upbringing as well. And then when I was 17, I moved back to England, where I've lived ever since. So I sort of have a bit of a mongrel accent and a bit of a chameleon accent. So I can sort of like turn it up a bit, you know what I mean? Like, but when I'm in London, I can talk a bit more like a Londoner as well, you know, right? So I would say that, you know, I don't come from a legal family.
Is he like a first generation then?
First generation of lawyers in my family. I would say that I came to the law through Irish republicanism. Obviously, I grew up in South Armagh with British Army helicopters flying over my head, and you know, teenagers with machine guns walking through my family fields and stuff. So some of my earliest memories are of, you know, my father explaining to me that a part of Ireland was occupied, and then I moved to England with this very staunch Irish Republican politics, and it was while studying my undergraduate degree in London that I sort of realized that, like, look, you know, the Irish struggle was obviously at its height in sort of the 70s and 80s, and I'd maybe caught the tail end of it. And that's when I became very interested in the Palestinian struggle.
Yeah.
And it just, like, speaking plainly, like, I would have had a lot of comrades who were British, and I had this very anti-British attitude, and some very wonderful British communists just explained to me that, like, look, you know, you're not right because you're Irish, and I'm not wrong because I'm British. And they kind of introduced me into a more internationalist way of thinking. And so I became very involved in Palestinian struggle. And when I was doing my undergrad, Israel started bombing Gaza in 2008-9, Operation Cast Lead, so called. And we occupied the biggest lecture theatre at my university. And that really kind of radicalized me. It made me realize how urgent the Palestinian struggle was. And it was through, so I would say that it was Irish republicanism led me to Palestinian solidarity. Palestinian solidarity led me to communism, and it was a desire to stand in solidarity with the international working class in their struggle against imperial capitalism that led me to the
So there's all sorts of ways, obviously, that people participate in struggle. You decided that to go into the law was the best way that you could, as a human rights lawyer, to tackle those injustices. Was that something that then you were very conscious of right from the beginning when you were practicing?
Absolutely. I was surrounded by people engaged in Palestine solidarity activism at university. I was doing a history degree. I didn't know what to do when I graduated from that degree, and I spoke to mostly Palestinian comrades, and they said, I'm thinking of one person in particular who will remain nameless, but who's a formidable Palestinian lawyer who's now practicing in England alongside me. And they said to me, Frank, mate, we've got to become barristers so we can go and prosecute Israeli war criminals. And it's no deeper than that. Literally, I became a lawyer from someone to prosecute Israeli war criminals.
It really is the sort of Bobby Sands. Everyone has their part to play. You know, you just got to find where your role is. And at that stage, let's go forward now to the work that you're involved in at present. And I know that you have been involved in a lot of these human rights type cases, which maybe haven't got the attention that you've got recently. So people may hear, maybe not know a lot of the cases that you've been working on behind the scenes. So could we maybe go through some of them? The Arsenal case, explain to me what that's about.
So this case just hit the press yesterday, actually. I've been working on it for a while behind the scenes, and we've finally gone public with it. So there's a man called Mark Bonnick, who it's my privilege to represent. And he is a kit man. So he worked at Arsenal's youth team. He's worked there for more than 2 decades. He's a very solid working class man, has his head very firmly screwed on, and he knows where he stands on various issues. And he has a private Twitter account, or I mean, it's in his name or whatever, but it's not a particularly big Twitter account. He just takes to Twitter to talk about his opinions, as many of us do. And he expressed his opinions on various political conflicts, one of which was the genocide that's happening in Palestine, and then some malicious Zionist accounts found what he had said, worked out that he worked for a high-profile employer, doxed him, and so he was dragged into a disciplinary process. He was criticized by his employer, Arsenal Football Club, for the things that he said critical of Israel and Zionism. And then on Christmas Eve, a few months ago, 5 months ago now, he was fired. So fired from his long-standing employer of more than 20 years. He was a loyal supporter and employee of Arsenal Football Club. So, I mean, we've all seen countless stories like this, right? People take to Twitter to express their outrage at the mass murder of Palestinian people because they're deemed to be some kind of racial threat to the purity of Israel's apartheid state. And he said things that I am extremely comfortable defending in court. He said things like, well, this is all about Jewish supremacy, isn't it? And clearly some people winced at that and thought that he was making some kind of anti-Semitic statement, but he wasn't. He was pointing out what any of us who are paying attention can see very, very clearly, which is that Israel, not Jewish people, Israel, the state of Israel, has created an apartheid regime, which is a matter of law, means that there are inhumane acts happening with a view to creating a system of racial domination. So he's not a lawyer, but he, like all of us in this room, saw what the Zionist entity is doing, saw the mass murder of people because they're deemed to be a racial impurity. He took to Twitter to express his outrage. He criticized people. He engaged in entirely legitimate political discussions. And Arsenal, coming under pressure from Zionists and facing a disgraceful campaign in the media where they accused him of anti-Semitism without any reasonable basis, Arsenal, in a particularly cowardly fashion, just shoved him out the door and fired him. So we're now suing them, not just for unfair dismissal, but also for unlawful discrimination. So the demand is that he be given his job back, and that will, and if Arsenal has the courage to admit that they made a mistake, then people will see an example of the way that the tide is turning. That's the hope.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I want to leave the media part for later on in the discussion. I'm quite happy to attack the media, despite being a member of the media. But at the same time that this is happening, we have high-profile people like Alison Pearson, Dan Wooten, claiming that those who call for asylum seekers to be burnt out of their accommodation last August are political prisoners and demanding they be released. So the freedom of speech element of that applies to some, but not others.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a crisis of freedom of speech in this country, right? The so-called United Kingdom or the British Empire, depending on who you ask, right? Like, it's just completely obvious. Like, look at what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, right? Like, he was the leader of the opposition, he was the democratically elected leader of the Labour Party, and yet he was savagely attacked by every single corner of the British establishment. And it's that classic thing in politics where they try and turn your biggest strength into your biggest weakness. So clearly that man had decades of unimpeachable anti-racist activism under his belt. And so they try to transform him into a hideous racist or whatever. So he was horrifically attacked and maligned as an anti-Semite and a terrorist and all the rest of it. And if it can happen to the leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition, clearly it can happen to people in less powerful positions. And what we've seen is people being fired from their jobs, people being dragged in front of their regulators, people being arrested, people being attacked, people being doxxed. It's like I said, like we're witnessing a crisis of Zionism. Zionism has the mask has slipped so completely. Everyone can see Zionism for what it is, which is a nakedly racist colonial ideology that's bent on the destruction of the Palestinian people. And so, because Zionism is in such a crisis, those who would defend it, which include the British state, are having to double down and massively increase the repression that people face whenever they attempt to name and criticize the problem, which is that Zionism is racist and it views Palestinians as a problem to be solved with various forms of racist violence.
And that includes, as well as I know the Arsenal case, you are also involved in the case of some doctors who have been treated similarly, and you would think that doctors are pointing out what is very obvious, that children are being massacred, especially doctors who have been brave enough to go and work in those hospitals. They're coming back and being treated appallingly when they just speak the truth.
Absolutely. So one of the big things that I have been doing a lot is professional regulation, right? So we have the GMC, which regulates doctors. We have the SRA, which regulates solicitors in England and Wales. We have the Bar Standards Board, which regulates barristers. We have the Charities Commission, which regulates charities. We have the Teachers Regulation Authority, which regulates teachers. So any professional, in addition to any employee being at risk of being just fired, or subjected to some other form of unjust disciplinary process because they've criticized Israel and its racist ideology and its genocide. We also have this problem of regulatory proceedings. So there was a High Court case of mine that was resolved on Wednesday, just now, a few days ago, and unfortunately we lost that case because, in fairness, the tweets in question were somewhat difficult to defend. But I would encourage the lawyers and those interested to read that judgment. Right, what comes out of it is the extent, I think, of the crisis of Zionism. So we have an English High Court judge looking at a solicitor who's been struck off for criticizing Israel and who represented himself at first instance. And that decision has been appealed to the High Court. And a very thoughtful judgment from Mr. Justice Chamberlain talks about the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, and the way that has been wielded to suppress criticism of Israel and Zionism. And I encourage people to read it because it really speaks to the scale of the crisis, where even the English High Court is saying it is not inherently anti-Semitic to compare Zionism to Nazism. Like, what is clear is that this definition of anti-Semitism has been maliciously wielded to shelter Israel and Zionism from entirely legitimate criticism, and the regulators have been especially guilty of that, right? Doctors, solicitors, whatever. Take the Twitter to say, in my opinion, the mass murder of children because they're deemed to be a racial threat is disgusting and akin to various forms of fascism. The regulators have been intervening and saying, you can't say that, that's racist, we need to drive you out of your profession. And it seems to me that the tide is turning. People have realized that Israel's days are numbered and that the people who are criticizing it are correct and the British state is incorrect. And I will just say that a crucial part of this picture is that, and I think an argument that's missing from a lot of less principled lawyers' submissions, is that the British state is participating in this genocide.
Yeah.
It has a commitment to Zionism that is more than 100 years old. It is staunchly committed to the fantasy of a little loyal Jewish Ulster, right, of creating this racially pure colony, which fantasy was premised in part on anti-Semitism. And so, in my opinion, what we need to do is just go into court and say the quiet part loud. Just say, Zionism is extremely racist. We should cross-examine Zionist witnesses and say, you are extremely racist. You view Palestinians as racially inferior. That's disgusting. You have no business calling yourself an expert if that's what you think. And we should also name the fact that because the British state in its totality is participating in this genocide, that means that its regulatory bodies like the SRA, the GMC, etc., that those bodies are all acting pursuant to a deep logic of British colonial racism. And we should just go into the High Court and say, sorry, did you not notice that you're part of an extremely racist colonial empire that is deeply implicated in national
So there are a number of ways, obviously, as a human rights lawyer, that you can go in and try and dismantle this infrastructure and draw attention to it as well. And we know that ordinary people have been involved in boycotting a lot of Israeli goods, and that people would say that isn't doing any use. And then we've seen recently it has, and we've seen that those companies have been losing money and that those campaigns do really work. One of the other things, I suppose, the financial side of it is the Lloyds Bank case. Do you want to explain that to us?
Absolutely. So I suppose one of the frustrating things about being a lawyer is that stuff in the legal sector takes a long time, right? And you know, I would say that Israel will be defeated on the ground in Palestine, and of course we'll come to the fact that I'm representing Hamas, who are engaged in exercising their right to armed resistance under international
I'm building up to it, Frank. I'm building up to it.
No,
I guess
just
stick with me here. I have a plan.
So you're sort of talking like part of your. I'm going to come to your.
I think you've got to come at these things from all different angles,
Absolutely.
and the divestment angle is a really important part of that.
And I will come to the Lloyd's point. I think so. The Lloyd's case is interesting. I just think just to riff off of your point about ordinary people, Israel will be defeated by ordinary people. It's being defeated as we speak by ordinary people in Palestine. It's being defeated by ordinary people in Yemen, and it's also being defeated by ordinary people like marching through London, marching through the capital cities of many countries. Like, ordinary people are appalled by the mass murder of Palestinians, right? Ordinary people are appalled by the way that they have to wake up every day and watch children being murdered because they're a threat to the demographic purity of a so-called Jewish state, right? That's disgusting. It's an affront to humanity. And that's how ordinary people feel. And that's how my clients in the Lloyd's case felt before the genocide happened. So some of you will remember that in May 2021, the Zionists stormed Masjid al-Aqsa, right, the third holiest site in Islam, in Al-Quds, right, in Jerusalem. So that happened, and then my clients came into, my two clients, two Muslim women, came into court, work the next day. They worked at Lloyds Bank, and they posted things on the internal company forum. Obviously, COVID had happened, and so the bank had set up an internal forum for people to try and stay connected while they were working from home. So these Muslim women came in to talk about how the third holiest site in their religion had been stormed by a violent colonial entity, and said things that I was, again, entirely comfortable
First person who asked the question, it's always the most difficult one, and after that there's like a whole load of hands go up. So someone just be the first person to go a set and ask me a question. There you go.
I'm very saying this because I've never spoken publicly before. What I'm going to say is that I am very disappointed in the people of Derry for not standing up for Palestine. I am a child who was born in the 60s, and Derry was always good standing up for people, and my heart is broken that the people of Derry are standing out and walking and protesting for what's happening in Palestine. I can't understand why the people of Derry are broken-hearted, seeing all the children that are dying through bombing and starvation and everything else. And I'm sorry, I don't do this, but I just have to say this because I'm so impassioned about what's happening to the children in Palestine.
Well, I would just say that obviously you are in there and you are standing up, and there's more and more of us who are, and they will be inspired by your stand, and I commend you for it.
Thank you so much.
Appreciation.
Thanks
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
Thank you.
It's been absolutely